So let's get to some of the details about what Elon is up to and, the disasters I think they are courting. So Trump has repeated, Trump really positioned himself as like a different kind of Republican who's not going to be like the Tea Party austerity obsessed deficit hawk. And he separated himself in the Republican primary, positioning himself as a populist who wouldn't touch Social Security or Medicare in particular. And now you've got Elon Musk, who has been granted by Trump all of this power within the administration. I would say that much more of the direction of the administration has been Elon's ideology than Trump's ideology. And Elon went on Joe Rogan's podcast for a lengthy conversation, and as part of that, reiterated his attacks on Social Security. Let's take a listen to that.
Well, the government's one big pyramid scheme, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, you can tell me better than anybody.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
Right, explain that.
Oh, so, people pay into Social Security, and the money goes out of Social Security immediately, but the obligation for Social Security is your entire retirement career. So you're paying you're paying like if you look at the future obligations of Social Security, it far exceeds the tax revenue. Far. Have you ever looked at the debt clock?
Yes.
Okay. There's our present day debt, but then there's our future obligations. So when you look at the future obligations of Social Security, the actual national debt is like double what people think it is because of the future obligations. So basically, people are living way longer than expected, and there are fewer babies being born. So you have more people who are retired and that live for a long time and get retirement payments. So the future obligations. So however bad the financial situation is right now for the federal government, it will be much worse in the future.
Simple fix, you lift the cap so that rich people have to pay more into Social Security and it doesn't just cut off at 125, and then you would be good to go with regard to Social Security. But, this is Elon's ideology. He, I think it is accurate to say, is an anarcho-capitalist. That means that he actually thinks every function of government should be privatized. That's why he talks about things like, I think every government employee should take what he describes as a more productive job in the private sector. As Liz Franczak said on Twitter, though, you have to love the ideology in which Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and meme coins are strategic assets.
That's what's insane about this is you have a multi-billionaire, obviously, arguably the most powerful person to walk the face of the earth right now.
True.
In a t-shirt on a podcast, laughing at Social Security as a Ponzi scheme, and it gets to what we were just talking about in the last block, but reversed, which is Social Security does have problems. Like, this is a quote from a Cato Institute analysis, so obviously Cato Institute is probably much more sympathetic with the anarcho-capitalist, and Milton Friedman famously had called Social Security a Ponzi scheme for decades. But in 1950, there were about 16 workers paying into Social Security for every retiree. Today, that number has dwindled to just 2.7 workers per retiree, and it's projected to fall further to 2.4 workers per retiree by 2035. So this is from a Cato Institute blog saying Social Security is a legal Ponzi scheme, which is where people like Elon Musk get really comfortable tossing that around because it's an ideological formulation of the right for decades.
Since the advent of Social Security.
And Milton Friedman, again, was he's very much popularized thinking of Social Security in this way. And there are significant structural problems with Social Security, but talking about it on a podcast so flippantly, a multi-billionaire, extremely powerful person talking about it where he's almost giggling is not it. That is not the politics that Donald Trump wants to advance for MAGA. If Steve Bannon were here watching this with us, he'd be like, what the? Yeah,
I would think so. And especially, they're going to pass a $4 trillion tax cut for people like Elon Musk, who already, Tesla had multiple years where they paid $0 in tax.
It's their top priority right now.
Yes.
A tax cut is their top priority right now.
As it was in the first administration.
Yes.
And in that way, there's an ideological carryover, but from the first administration. But hey, if you just took that $4 trillion and put it into the Social Security Trust Fund, I think we'd be in good shape. But Bernie made, a similar point to what I was making. We'll put this up on the screen just to lay out some of the numbers here. He says, wrong, Elon. Social Security has paid every benefit owed to every eligible American for 86 years. We can make it solvent for the next 75 years and expand benefits by scrapping the cap that allows billionaires like you to pay the same amount into Social Security as a truck driver. So, the specter of having this man who aspires to be the first trillionaire, who, as you said, is probably the most powerful person who ever walked the face of the planet, sneering at the most successful social safety net program and the most popular social safety net program in the history of America that has lifted literally millions and tens of millions of people out of poverty is just, it is just disgusting. It is just disgusting. And nobody needs me to tell them that. Like, there is a visceral reaction to seeing this oligarch plutocrat who is plundering the government saying, we don't have money. We've got money for, endless wars. We've got money for my $4 trillion tax cut, but we don't have money for grandma's Social Security check. Like, get out of here with that.
Super bad. Just a super bad politics. And they're about to, I think, see that more and more show up in polling. And the more that Elon goes out and talks like this, it's going to be genuinely problematic for them because they've actually really tried. We were talking yesterday as we were prepping for the show, like, what did Project 2025 have to say about Social Security?
Yeah.
And I went back and looked because I remembered vaguely in my mind being like they had done something that was sort of new right-y, meaning like not old school con Inc. And I went back and looked, and the reason I remembered that is because it basically doesn't talk about Social Security. It talks about Social Security in a couple of different programs, like through the lens of abortion and that sort of thing, but there's no like big plan for Social Security, which is fascinating because if this were still Paul Ryan's Republican Party, that would have been a focal point of Project 2025. But the reason that it wasn't is that people on the right have said, you're allowed to still believe this stuff. Like, let's just turn the volume down. Like, let's, we may have to do all of these tweaks to Social Security at some point, and I'm of the perspective that like there are desperately structural changes that have to happen in Social Security, but politically, Trump world has said like, you guys got to turn down the volume on that. We cannot be out here talking about it. You can do that in 10 or 15 years. You can't do it right now. And then you have Elon Musk going out on Rogan and being like, it's a Ponzi scheme. And then he can't explain why it's a Ponzi scheme with any like persuasive answer that would resonate with average Americans who, to your point, are going to see his grandma's Social Security cut or are going to worry about that. That's good luck.
Well, and the worries are already here. I can put this up on the screen. So DOE is just making massive cuts to the Social Security Administration. They're saying they plan to cut some 7,000 jobs. The number I saw was that this was like roughly half the workforce that they're planning on cutting. Some of those cuts have already come. Ryan actually tweeted on a list of some of the people who have already been fired, and they have names like Regional Commissioner for New York, Deputy Regional Commissioner for Kansas City, Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Ohio. So,
and Ryan confirmed that they actually were fired because the administration was saying that we've mutually agreed to like sort of part ways.
Yeah.
But Ryan confirmed with his sources that this was like an actual purge.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I saw bunch of local newspapers across the country that are covering the fact that their local Social Security offices are being shuttered. And, these are really important resources for if you have some sort of an issue with Social Security and, you need to go to the office, then, that's your local resource that you go to. And to see those shuttered, again, to your point about how these cuts are not just being felt in Washington, D.C. among like some, Ukraine flag liberals or whatever. These are really across the country in critical ways that are going to show up in every community in some way across the country. And, people like to be able to go to their Social Security office. They like that they have a regional commissioner so that things can be taken care of. And I also think you are courting disaster to think, listen, we know when Elon came in and slashed and burned Twitter, things broke. Things still break. I can't, my DMs aren't working on my freaking phone right now. Right now. And when it's Twitter, it's like, oh, well, whatever. I'll just get them later. I'll do it on my laptop, et cetera. When it's your Social Security check, it's a little bit more important. Or when it's airplanes falling out of the sky, it's a little more important. When it's food safety and we don't have the regulators to be able to make sure that the standards are being upheld, or baby formula where we've already had issues in the past, these things are more consequential, and there is not the same margin for error of like, oh, oops, our Ron DeSantis Spaces was a total and complete disaster, but no one's going to die from that.
To be fair, your Twitter DMs, they're probably hacked by Mossad.
That is possible.
Probably not Elon's fault.
Although they are also, I read that some Doge staffer is like figuring out ways to download everybody's DMs as well, and I probably run some AI program through it, et cetera. So it could be that too. Who knows?
Seems perfectly legal. What is the very legal, very cool? That's how Trump described something once.
That's right.
Very legal, very cool.
That's exactly right. I was mentioning the FAA, some of the air safety pieces. Let's just put this next piece up on the screen to the point of the self-dealing that has been going on. So last week I talked about how Elon's SpaceX people had gone in and were like, this $2.1 billion contract that was going to Verizon, it's going to go to Starlink now. Well, they apparently, that hasn't been made official yet, but they are already ordering staff to root around to find millions of dollars in funding for Elon's Starlink. So, tens of millions of dollars, they say, for a Starlink deal, according to sources here with Rolling Stone. And, again, I think people have two ways they can look at billionaires. And I wish people just had an auto negative on billionaires in America, but they don't. They have two ways they can look at it. One is like, oh, he's so brilliant and he's so successful and he's such a genius. We're so lucky to have him and, rooting around in the government. The other is that, this is an arrogant prick who is just self-interested and is a robber baron. And the reason he's so rich is because he steals things for himself. And when you have situations like this unfolding, it is clear the way that people are going to, if they don't already, view Elon Musk in the context of all the power he has in our government.
Well, I mean, you described him earlier in the show as an anarcho-capitalist, and I think that's how he sees himself. But the better way to describe that is a crony capitalist, because he doesn't believe in the anarcho part of that. He still believes that there should be a government to give him contracts.
That's
to coerce
really
taxpayers to give him content.
That is a really important priority. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing with it's I think two things can be true. He can be brilliant on the one hand and also be a robber baron. And that's the interesting thing about Elon Musk, is that Republicans for a long time he had a decent bit of pop cultural credibility baked in before he started going full Doge. And we're starting to see that sort of crumble to an extent. And Republicans were not used to having someone from Silicon Valley, where they had been really cozy with Democrats since the Obama administration. They were not used to having somebody that had pop cultural cachet and from Silicon Valley and lots of money be so nice to them.
Yeah.
And that was very exciting. And he could go on Joe Rogan and talk about all these things of the government that are broken, but that has a flip side, and that is increasingly becoming very, very clear that there's another side of this coin, politically at least. So, I mean, it's similar to what we were saying with Democrats and Doge. And one of the things I feel with Democrats and Doge is that they need to have a better answer, because if the public is asked to say the government is inefficient, is the government inefficient, and are you going to vote based on this? You may have some people genuinely continuing to vote Republican, even if they're upset with Doge and feel like some of the stuff isn't going well, because Democrats' answer is USAID is wonderful and there's never been any problems with it, and just shut up if you're talking about this, you're wrong. They need to have a better answer. On the other hand, Republicans need to have a better answer. You can't just send Elon Musk out to talk about how Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. You have to, it's like repeal and replace. The politics of repeal and replace fell apart when they didn't have a good replacement.
Yeah, that's true. One of the things Democrats could do is just insist on the return of inspectors general, whose job it is to look into waste, fraud, and abuse, and to not cut the GAO, which is the government office, and to beef those things up. But you're absolutely and going beyond the plan for government efficiency or whatever, which I do think the conception of trying to run government like a business is just. It doesn't make ideological sense, because the goal of government isn't to turn a profit. The goal of government is to, do things like protect our food and protect our children and, make sure that airplanes aren't crashing out of the sky and make sure that grandma's able to eat and not be, eating cat food or whatever. But I think more broadly, they need to have an explanation of the world, of what went wrong, of what led people to feel so stressed and be truly so stressed, and, how prices have gotten so out of control. They need to be able to point their finger at villains, the oligarchs and billionaires of the world, who even before Doge were sort of robbing us all blind, but in perhaps more subtle ways. And they can't really do that until they clean up their own house in that regard. And we'll talk more about that once we get into the block about what the Democrats are up to and what they are thinking and complaining about, et cetera. Just to roll quickly through the last two updates with regard to Doge before we get to this crypto mess. So put the next piece up on the screen. We have a new iteration of the what did you do last week TPS report email. This time Hegseth is saying, okay, no, actually I do want everybody to respond to this thing with, I guess, looming potential firing if you don't. This has been obviously huge back and forth. Elon put this thing out. A bunch of agency heads, including Hegseth, resisted, and Rubio and RFK sort of said, yes, respond, and then said, don't respond. Now, this email is supposed to be going out today, and DoD civilians, of which there are millions, that's the largest employer in the workforce. I think you said like 30% of the federal government's civilian workforce are under Department of Defense. So this is extremely consequential in terms of that workforce. And then the last piece is a legal update here. We have, I mentioned the inspectors general that had been fired, put C6 up on the screen. We had a judge rule that it is constitutional for the Office of Special Counsel to assert independence from the president as legitimate authority to act free of removal by the president without cause, she rules. Next up, SCOTUS. So this is one of the court battles that's playing out over who can be fired under what circumstances, because there are laws that govern, with some of these individuals. There has to be a time period. Congress has to be alerted. It has to be for cause. It can't just be capricious because we feel like it. And so this one is likely headed up to the Supreme Court for a consequential ruling about whether the executive has total and complete control over hirings and firings, or whether Congress can say, no, for things like inspectors general, you have to give us a reason why you're getting rid of them, because you can see how this could be used in a bad, whoa, this person was investigating me in a way I didn't like, now they're gone, et cetera. So they try to insulate them from those sorts of political pressures. Yeah, just one of those decisions where the Trump administration would say maybe facially it's against the statute, but the statute is unconstitutional. Right. So they're trying to, we've talked about this, they're trying to push it into the Supreme Court to get decisions that would centralize power essentially with the executive, because they don't want bureaucrats to be able to subvert the executive. It's an interesting ideological conversation, but this is a part of that. Yeah, so we'll see. That one's headed up to the Supreme Court, so we'll see what direction they go into with that.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.